First Radio.
Hey, what's up, you guys? Welcome to Word First Radio, the podcast brought to you by Word First Ministries. I am your host, Jacob O'Neill, and as always, I'm joined by my friend Cameron.
Hello.
And Cam.
Yeah.
I had an idea.
Okay.
So, I thought it would be fun to celebrate the Easter season the way that everybody celebrates the Easter season, which is to talk about misconceptions, myths about Jesus in the New Testament.
The stuff that comes around in like Time Magazine and the History Channel every Easter.
And then the venerable font of historical wisdom, the Da Vinci Code.
The Da Vinci Code.
Yes.
I love that.
I don't know how relevant that is to anyone listening right now, but I remember growing up in a Christian home, I remember the Da Vinci Code a lot.
Yeah, the Da Vinci Code is rough because it's full of just nonsense. Just nonsense. And it's in the fiction section, of course, and it's a novel. You can watch the movie. Tom Hanks is in it.
Yeah.
But it's full of nonsense. But right there on the first page, it has this, like, I don't have it in front of me. I should have brought it. But it's like, it starts with all of the descriptions and artwork and da-da-da-da-da in this book are fact. Okay. I mean, it's not. Like, it gets wrong. I think it says that the Louvre has 65,000 artifacts and it has something like 32,000.
Nice.
Like, it doesn't even get basic facts. Well, that's not true. There's some stuff in there that's incidentally true or true, but it doesn't.
True by coincidence.
Well, no, there's stuff that's like genuinely true, but it has nothing to do with the main thesis of. I shouldn't say thesis of the book because it's not really an argument, but that's to say that the conventional wisdom has absorbed a lot of falsehoods that can find not their genesis, but their popularization from the Da Vinci Code, and people don't even know it. So we hear the same stuff over and again. That's just completely false. It's not even close.
Right, and the purpose. We're not here to talk about the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah.
It'll come up. We'll talk about it a little bit. Some of the things that Dan Brown says, but these kinds of historical misconceptions. So this is about Jesus, the New Testament, the early church, the formation of the Bible, all those kinds of things that we hear from university campus students, that we hear from atheists online in memes. There's actually a couple Facebook groups dedicated to this whole kind of thing. Yeah. And it's the kind of thing that you hear, at least in my opinion, very, very smart people who should know better kind of repeat this kind of thing. So it's on the Joe Rogan podcasts, repeated these kinds of things. There's some famous atheist, Richard Dawkins, repeats some of these myths and things like that in his published works.
And they're just, when it comes to Nicaea, just embarrassing errors.
Oh yeah, and we're going to talk about those. We're going to talk about all those. Maybe not all of them, but at least the ones we hear the most.
I'll wait till you let me off my leash.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm gonna let you off right now. So, Jesus mythicism. There's this kind of idea when we talk to people that I'll tell you how it comes up for me when I speak with people.
Okay, good.
They tell me like, well, I'm not gonna say Jesus never existed, or like, I guess probably Jesus existed. I think it's most likely Jesus existed. Yeah. How do you feel when you hear that? Because I'll tell you, for me, what I hear them kind of say is like, well, I guess it's probably true that the earth is not flat. Or it's probably, I guess I'm not going to say that I can't know that the earth is not, or that the earth isn't round. Like, I guess it could be round. Sure, it could be round. What do you think when you hear that?
Not much.
Yeah.
So, it seems like so I have had the same experience, of course. People say something like, and Jesus, if he did exist, or Jesus probably existed, I guess. And it seems like they're making like a charitable concession, a charitable concession for the sake of argument. Like, listen, we all know he probably didn't, but maybe he did, and it doesn't really matter. But even the idea that it is debatable whether Jesus existed in history is crazy town. You either have to have be either very ignorant of the history or be so steeped in the history that you can defend any position.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So it's one of those things that happens like if you don't know anything about what you're talking about, or in that part of the academy where anything, and again, that position doesn't exist in the academy so much. There aren't very many serious scholars or professors who would countenance the idea that Jesus didn't exist. That's lunatic fringe stuff. But there are some things that are so dumb you had to have learned them in college. And this is one of those. In my I'm sorry, I don't mean to denigrate anybody, and I don't mean to. There are some well-known people with legitimate credentials who will argue
Right.
that Jesus didn't exist. Okay, let's go read the literature and see what they're publishing and read the arguments and the rejoinders. But that's
Right.
not what most people are doing. Most people aren't saying, I've read Bob Price, I've read Richard Carrier, and I think that there's a better way to understand the New Testament than that these friends of Jesus were writing stories about him or writing history or biography about Jesus. That's not what people are saying. It's just this impulse that has stained our culture, which is you can't really know. Whatever the Christians, whatever they're saying. I mean, Jesus. We know that there's none of this miracle stuff, but Jesus, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Who knows? And it, like we said together, it feels like when we're talking about Jesus, like this charitable concession. Okay, well, maybe he was real. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I wonder exactly why that is. And I think, there's a few reasons why. I think that C.S. Lewis had a really great. I think I've said before on the podcast that if there's anything smart that I've ever said, it's really just me paraphrasing C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
And so, because he was brilliant, and I think he said something like that whoever Jesus was, what he definitely wasn't was unimportant.
Yeah.
Or not significant. And I think something that everybody kind of recognizes, and it's good that everyone recognizes it, is that whoever Jesus was, whether he was just an important rabbi, the son of God, a Jewish rebel, insurrectionist or whatever, a socialist, right?
Yeah.
Whoever Jesus was, he was very important.
Well, and every religion wants a slice of him.
Oh yeah,
right. So the Muslims say Jesus. Everyone wants Jesus to be one of theirs. Jesus was a Muslim, and there are certain Hindus and Buddhists who will say that Jesus was an Eastern thinker or a bodhisattva who traveled to the East in order to learn spiritual enlightenment or something like that. The New Age loves Jesus.
Right.
Progressive Christians who, in my opinion, many of them aren't Christian in any legitimate sense, but what they hang on to is something is Jesus in some sense.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean to talk about that as a whole thing, but from my even from my perspective, they don't affirm any of the essential doctrines of Christianity. In fact, proudly don't affirm any of the what would have been the sort of the mere Christian doctrines through Christian history.
Right.
But they want to call themselves Christian after Jesus. So that's a strange thing to me that Jesus maybe didn't exist, but everyone wants he's the most significant person who ever has existed.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is, is much more impressive than the feats of other people who I know didn't exist to be the most significant person in history. So there's a atheist New Testament or agnostic atheist New Testament scholar named Bart Ehrman, who I actually I don't know how much trouble I'm going to get for saying this, a lot.
Yeah.
I actually like him a lot. I think if I ever want to know what the majority of scholarship or the majority of critical scholars believe, and by critical scholars I don't mean they are not Christians, mostly they are not Christians, but people who take a very critical approach to the traditional views of the interpretations of the text and things like that, and they bring in a lot of newer perspectives that they would argue are actually older, more correct perspectives, and that's kind of a big umbrella. Calling them critical scholars is not a negative term,
right.
but that's kind of a umbrella term to describe those kinds of people. They take a quote-unquote newer approach and argue that this is a more accurate way to understand the New Testament and things like that. So if I ever want to know that perspective, Bart Ehrman is a really great person to talk to because he really takes those perspectives.
I don't agree with him on nearly everything, but he's another one of those guys that is scary to disagree with because the number of people on the planet who know more than he does in their relevant fields is really, really narrow. Oh, he's a brilliant guy. He's really brilliant. And he says something like, in his debate with Robert Price on the existence of Jesus, he says in his opening statement, he's like, we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the rest of the New Testament, all these, he calls the four Gospels four independent sources. These are four historiobiographical narratives written about Jesus in the first century, four independent ones, which is quite impressive if he didn't exist, because we don't have anything like the four Gospels for any other person in the first century from the first century, right? Not like emperors. We have nothing like what we have for Jesus for. So suppose, for the sake of argument, suppose Jesus didn't exist. Jesus is in a human sense, in one sense, a very minor like he's a itinerant rabbi in a little place in the first century. Like he's insignificant by sort of worldly standards. You have the most important people in history, and you don't get 4 independent biographies from them within within a few decades of their death.
Yeah, definitely not. And so you get them hundreds of years later,
Centuries
later. But none that come from the time. And so Bart Ehrman's basically, I think his approach is very modest, and I agree with him. I just think it's like, listen, if we have these narratives written about this guy, and this movement that these narratives say that he started changed the entire world within just a couple hundred years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably existed. It's probably
written by people who claim to be his friends and and his actual brothers.
Right.
And this is not a knockdown argument, but so I've got so much to say, and most of it is just bound up in my mouth because this is not a knockdown argument, but it's like even our modern Western calendar, like what year are we in? It's 2024, 2024 AD, which is in the year of our what? Like BC or before BC, or even if you want to say BCE, before Common Era. Like what is the turning point? Like the turning point even of our calendar. And so if you want to say that Jesus didn't exist in the face of the kind of evidence that we have, that is a massive, massive undertaking. I mean, I think at least as massive as saying something like Alexander the Great didn't exist. You go, okay, you're going to you've got a lot of work to do. Extraordinary claims.
Yes.
You have a lot of work to do to go about proving that thing. And so it's a little bit frustrating isn't the word. It doesn't make me mad, but it's like it's a little bit rich to hear. Well, Jesus, if he did exist, we don't. Who knows? Yeah. And like if we think we can believe or know anything about the existence of any historical figure, like Jesus is the evidence we have for Jesus has to be the sort of platinum standard.
Yeah.
And if we want to be skeptical about his existence, then we just can't be. We have to be wildly skeptical about the existence of, I don't know, virtually anybody, especially in a day and age with artificial intelligence. A decade ago, people would say, well, I'd believe if Jesus existed if we had photographic evidence. And since we don't, then we can't be sure about any historical figure before roughly Abraham Lincoln, before we really had good photographic portraiture. Before then, who knows? Who knows?
Right.
We have to be skeptical. And you go, goodness gracious, that's a whole lot to give up. But even now that we have crazy AI that can make you a video or a photograph of anything that you want, then you have to be even more skeptical. You'd have to say, well, no, we have this digital technology that can produce what seems to be evidence, and so you have to be radically skeptical about all claims in the past. And I think that's just silly.
So what's a bigger bullet to bite? Because I think the reason why people might gravitate towards Jesus mythicism is because accepting that Jesus existed at all involves biting a pretty big bullet, which is that he's important in some way. And so what's a bigger bullet to bite, do you think? Giving up all of our knowledge of history pre-Lincoln or pre-photographic evidence? Yeah. Or admitting that, nope, Jesus existed, and that means he's significant in some way.
And we have to deal with what he did and said.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we can... So we talked about this in a previous podcast. I think our culture keeps wanting to put religion in the mythical hobby box.
Yeah.
And so if we want to call it just a myth, like guys like you and me go, no. We have to deal with what Jesus said. Like Jesus was here, and here are the things that he said. He can't just be a good guy. Like Lewis also pointed out, right? Yeah. Whatever we want to say about Jesus, he was just a good moral teacher is not an option that he leaves open to us.
Right.
But if we want him to still fill just that role, he was a great moral teacher, then we have to make him imaginary. But if Jesus is imaginary, then that radically transforms what we think we can know about the past, and it leads to this kind of radical skepticism that I think is irrational. I think it's important that we are rational and reasonable about our doubts as well as our beliefs, but I think it leads to an irrational view of the world, a rationally skeptical view of the world, in which case there's just no foundation for almost anything. again, I've got a lot I could say about that. I have to organize my thoughts, but it's like if you're going to be so skeptical, then whatever your standards of knowledge are going to lead you to not know a whole lot of stuff that you definitely know, and to a life that if you lead it consistently is unlivable.
Yeah. No, I think that's really true. And so something that couples along with, kind of Jesus mythicism is this idea about now we can introduce our friend Dan Brown,
gosh, yeah.
Dan Brown a little bit. So something that kind of comes along with this idea is a misconception, huge misconception about what the New Testament is and how it came together.
Yeah.
This is an area of this issue that I am really passionate about and love to study, but I need you to help me with my thoughts here and get it all together. But there's this idea that is very well circulated. I'll tell you, I hear it the most from atheist memers online and Muslims I talk to in person.
Yeah.
Even here in Oslo, I've heard this from Muslims.
Yeah.
And they tell me that, well, Jesus, the New Testament was compiled and put together by Constantine at the Council of Nicaea, and it was put together as a Roman political tool, and they chose the books that fit the narrative and threw away the ones that didn't, and this is how you have your 66-book Bible.
Right.
I don't even know what to say to that. Well, I do know what to say to that. That is literal historical fiction.
Yeah,
it's
absolute
literal
fiction.
It's literally a story that somebody came up with. I mean, people had this idea before Dan Brown, but that is not an accurate picture at all of two things: what the New Testament is and what it's supposed to be for, and how it came together.
Right.
Not at all. Not even an accurate picture. Not even in the ballpark.
Yeah. So it's an example to me of something that is just. This is another one of those frustrating beliefs because it's held by otherwise intelligent people, but it means that you have just believed an out and out lie. It's not like there's just some more context you need to know.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know. It's like saying that the Civil War was had to do with I don't know, something that it didn't have to do with. Pick a thing. The Civil War had to do
to free the Jews.
Yeah, the Civil War was to free the Jews.
Sure.
And if you started hearing that everywhere, you go, whoa, 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 whoa. Like whatever the Civil War was about, it just had nothing to. It's not that.
Yeah, nothing to do with it.
And Nicaea is the same thing. Nicaea had nothing to do with which books belong in the Bible.
Nothing.
So
nothing
there's
to
a
do with
really rich and interesting conversation to be had about how it is that Christians regard certain texts as having come from God in some interesting way.
Right.
And I said that very specifically in a very vague way because it touches on several areas of doctrine and scholarship that are really, well, for certain people, really exciting and interesting.
I think it's really exciting and interesting, yeah.
So it touches on several academic disciplines and then also has implications for what Christians believe about the universe. So it's really important and it's really interesting. But whatever they did at Nicaea, it had nothing to do with which texts Christians thought were inspired, came from God, authoritative, represented our religion, something like that. It had nothing to... And what's frustrating is we can read. We can read exactly what Nicaea was about. We have lots of accounts. We have journal entries. We have their actual pronouncements and proclamations. I have it in front of me here. How many canons were at Nicaea? I think it was 18.
I think it was like 28 or something.
I have 20 canons.
20, okay.
So 20 things that they decided on. Scripture makes it into none of them.
Yeah.
And we can read it. You can read it for free online.
Yeah, and by canons, it's not any canons of Scripture. They didn't come up with 20 different lists. They made 20 declarations.
Declarations of the definition of the faith.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can read it online. I mean, it's very well circulated. You find it in the books, so there's a book called The God Delusion written by Richard Dawkins.
Right.
Don't read it, not because I want to protect you from anything anti-Christian, but because the book is awful.
It's so
and
bad. There's
really bad.
good stuff you could read.
Way better.
But that ain't it.
So Dawkins circulates this or at least has circulated this myth. It was on the Joe Rogan podcast. He said it was established historical fact that Constantine decided the books of the Bible.
Yeah.
No, and Constantine had no word. He didn't vote in the council. He wasn't like
right.
he called the council.
Yeah.
and there were like 300 some odd bishops there. But I mean, Constantine was not controlling the narrative. He didn't like tell them what to put in the New Testament or tell them
Constantine was
how
an
to vote.
emperor, not a theologian.
Oh, yeah.
And he definitely had ambitions that were separate from pure Christian orthodoxy or the perfect following Jesus in the perfect way. And I think you'd be foolish to doubt or to deny that. However, the purpose of Nicaea was to quash the Arian heresy, which, again, you get another. We should link to Bart Ehrman's video about this because I'm going to end up talking longer than he does, and he gets it handled in like 8 minutes and just does an excellent job. But Constantine is not a theologian. He just wants to have some unity and unification among the churches because that's better for his cultural goals. And so Nicaea was convened to deal with the Arian controversy, which was a new heresy that shows up in the beginning of the 4th century, saying that Jesus was he was divine, but he was a created being, and it has to do with some, I'll just say philosophical, so it has to do with some metaphysics about perfection. But because perfection means a certain thing, then you can't have these two co-equal divine persons. That causes a problem. Therefore, Jesus must be a created being. And that view gained some traction among the church and among the bishops in the early 4th century. And so Nicaea was convened to put that to rest. And so not only was Nicaea not about the Bible at all, it was about Christology. And Constantine didn't have a position on that either. He just wanted there to be an answer, so everyone believed the same thing, and you had unity and uniformity among the churches. Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and it's kind of a shame because I think that the whole history behind that and how the New Testament actually came together is actually like really interesting, like the actual history. So there was this quote going around from a comedian. David Cross. He has this. Yeah. I don't know if I should read it. It's really bad. But anyways, I'm going to read it. So he says, the Bible was written, then edited, then rewritten, then rewritten, then re-edited, then translated from dead languages, then retranslated, then edited, then rewritten, then given to kings for them to take their favorite parts, then rewritten, then translated again, and given to the Pope for him to approve, then rewritten, then edited again, then rewritten again, based on stories that were told orally 30 to 90 years after they happened to people who didn't know how to write. None of that is true. Yeah. Not a single one of them. That's just aggressive ignorance. He couldn't be, to the extent that anything he says is true, it just isn't important. Like, have popes throughout history made declarations about interpretation of scripture? Sure. The idea that that's what, like, we made a photocopy and then we chopped it to bits and then we made a photocopy of that and then that language was lost, so then we just made it up. And
or that it was
just nonsense.
Rewritten.
Right.
What is it?
Show me where.
Where's the? Yeah. So here's the thing. So you hear this a lot too. We actually had a year ago now-ish, Alan Schliemann on the podcast where we talked about the Bible being corrupted and when Muslims say that.
Right.
And the first thing I ask is, it was great. Never mind. I'm going to tell a different story.
Okay.
When we were in Bergen.
Yes.
And Twalaling was debating a Muslim. His name is Muhammad during Skeptics Week. And he was asked a question from the crowd during the Q&A section about, well, how can you believe the Bible if it's all been corrupted?
Yeah.
And Twaling's answer was perfect. And this is exactly what everyone should say when they're talking to a Muslim about this issue. When a Muslim tells you that the Bible and the Gospels have been corrupted, Twaling said, listen, the burden of proof, as it sits scientifically, is on you. You need to show me when, where, and who rewrote the Bible, changed it, corrupted it, and how that change has persisted to our time, and that we can't know what the original said. And I think that when you actually study how God decided to preserve his word through thousands, tens of thousands of manuscripts, you actually find the genius of God and his providence to bring us the New Testament to where we have now. And I have very, 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 very little doubt that what I hold on my phone or what I hold an English translation in my hand, that we have like a 99% accuracy towards what the apostles originally wrote. Like, we know what the New Testament said.
Yeah. Well, and so you're not wrong at all, of course. Yeah. But this idea that getting the Bible into English in 2024 or Norwegian. They just actually released a new Norwegian revision of the Norwegian translation of the Bible in 2024. The idea that, oh man, we should have Julian on the podcast to talk about this. Make a note.
Make a mental
Julian, if you
note,
hear
yes.
this, you're going to get a phone call
yes.
soon. The idea that the way that the text got to us was copies of copies of copies of copies, and as though the old ones were smashed. Or it's all often compared to the game telephone, right? And the thing about the game telephone is I whisper something in your ear, and that is the only source that you have. Then you whisper that in someone else's ear, and by the time it makes it to the end of the line, it's been corrupted. And isn't that interesting? That's nothing like how we get the biblical text, or, by the way, any ancient text.
Yeah.
So no one says this about the Odyssey or the Iliad, right?
Right.
We can't even know what was in it. Like, imagine that David Cross quotation about the Iliad, and so it's been completely invented by the Catholic Church or whatever. Like, what? No. What we have, I don't want to spend too much time talking about it.
Right.
But the way that we get our current Bible, I mean, the way that they even make printed editions of the Greek is by compiling thousands of early manuscripts, and we keep finding earlier ones, and we keep finding better ones. And there's an entire field of study that is occupied by the biggest nerds and the smartest people you'll ever know, who what they do is compile all of these texts and using the science of textual criticism, compile what the original said based on the evidence that they have. It's not the case that someone wrote it down, then it was copied, and the original was burned. Then that was copied, and the first copy was burned. And that was copied, and then the second copy was burned.
Yeah, exactly.
We have our thousands of manuscripts you can go look at right now. So if you want to accuse anybody or the church of what David Cross said, like editing, then rewriting, then re-editing, then
taking your favorate parts out.
then taking your favorite parts
Yeah.
out. What does he think we're translating the Bible from?
Yeah.
We're translating from a wealth of very, very early documents you can go and look at right now. You can go see the originals. So if somebody corrupted them, show me where their corruption is. Because I'm not translating the Bible at all, but the people who are not looking at a document from 2004 and nothing before that and going, okay, well, this is the best we have, right?
Right, exactly.
This is what we've got. Everything else has been destroyed. It's just silly. It's just silly.
Yeah, it's just silly. But the thing is that, I mean, silly things are often said with a lot of rhetorical force.
With confidence.
Yeah, with confidence. Silly things are often said with confidence, and it sounds like, I don't know what it is, because I can see for, like, someone who doesn't know anything about the issue, like, they hear like someone like David Cross say this, or they read the Da Vinci Code, or they hear like Richard Dawkins say like, the Council of Nicaea, they put together the Bible. And I could imagine someone reading that and just kind of like uncritically accepting it, just kind of be like, well, they say it with confidence. I mean, they wouldn't write it if they weren't sure.
Right, and it seems like something that everybody knows.
Yeah.
And now, you feel like you know something important about history.
Yeah. And it's like, it seems like the thing that could kind of be true, I guess. I mean, it happened a long time ago. Like, and it's, to me, it's unfortunate, really, because I think that a lot of the scholarship that's been done to show how the New Testament was compiled, when it was written, how it was written. I wonder what he means by the whole rewritten thing. He probably just means what he says by rewritten. He doesn't say copy.
Right.
You know what I mean? At least he would say, if he would have said that, it would have been a little better.
Yeah. And then edited. It's like, show me the edits. And
exactly.
we have thousands of years of manuscript evidence at this point, right? We have all the copies. No, we don't have all the copies. That's not what I meant to say.
Right.
But we have all of the generations of the text. From all of the English translations and Norwegian, whatever, the translations produced from the current time, as far back as well, for a very, very long time, right? So the point is not that we translate, like the English translation is not made from an earlier English translation. We go back to the best source documents that we have. Now, we don't have any of the originals of any of the texts, and nobody denies that.
Yeah, thank God.
But we get to the source documents as best we can.
Yeah.
And are able to, I shouldn't say we, because I have no part in making this happen. So I don't think I'll say anything else about textual criticism, except that the thing like David Cross says, or the idea that the Bible was compiled or put together at the Council of Nicaea, that's worse than just not knowing. Right? And if you ask somebody, well, how did the Bible come to be? And they go, you know what, I have no idea. That's a way better starting place than well, Constantine decided what was going to be in the Bible in the Council of Nicaea. You just go, okay, well, you think you know what ain't so, right?
Sure.
You think you know what ain't so, and Christians are often accused of, believing what they know ain't so, or taking things on faith without evidence. And this is one of those examples where it's like what you believe about this very important thing, where the Bible comes from, for example, what you believe about it is absolutely false. It's not even close. It bears no resemblance to reality, but it makes you feel like you know, and makes you feel like you have a good reason for rejecting it. And that's another thing, like something that continues to stick out for me. And this is true for whatever your worldview, whatever you believe about anything, is I place a very high price on intellectual and academic humility. So if your belief about something is about some position is that like only idiots and superstitious people believe this, blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, I think probably you don't understand it well enough, right? If you think that it's something that only idiots could do or only stupid people could believe, and shame on us in 2024. Like, we have access to the entirety of human information in our phones. Like, that's crazy. In your pocket, you could access a remarkable and unconsumable amount of data. And that's made us intellectually arrogant. And we believe that the people who came before us were all stupid. And these stupid, superstitious people who didn't have as much scientific, hadn't advanced scientifically as much as we had. Now we know how the world works. And the scientific information has filled in all of this religious superstition that and it's like, no. The most brilliant, genius, amazing, deep, wise, thoughtful, the polymaths, the most brilliant men and women who ever have lived, have taken these ideas very, very seriously, and up until very recently. But it hurts my soul a bit to hear sort of just the flippant rejection of people who say things like, we know the Bible was put together in Nicaea. It's like, oh man, that just shows how little you know about what you're talking. But with all of the confidence in the world, just going like, that's just what ancient people believe. That's what a bunch of, Bronze Age goat herders who didn't know how to write, as though it's so obviously false that only a moron could believe this nonsense. I just go, oh man, maybe it's nonsense. Whatever the thing is, maybe it's nonsense. And I hear Christians reject important ideas too from time to time, as though they're just nonsense that you only believe because you've been indoctrinated, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, listen, like when good and intelligent and wise people take the ideas seriously, it's worth it to take it seriously before you reject it. You can say, I don't know. I'm agnostic about it. I don't have any idea whether it's true or false. It doesn't seem right to me, but I'm not sure. I think that is a much more respectable position than, well, we know that Constantine invented the Bible in the early 300s so that he could subjugate the Roman population, as though that's what changed, as though Rome had no right, as though Rome couldn't subjugate or enslave people until they had finally we have a Bible. Now we can get to conquering the world and enslaving people.
Now we got it. We were a little light on religion before, but now we got it. Yeah. Speaking of that nonsense that I guess some people would think in the Bible, just real briefly in there. I mean, I think there are a few places, you can look. No, sorry. Let me back up. Speaking of that nonsense that people say is in the Bible, there is a endless fountain of places that you can look. A few better than being the section from Matthew 5-7, known as the Sermon on the Mount, right? And that's not if I was a Roman elite, that's not the text I would choose to propagate my narrative. Definitely not. Yeah. Because you've got things in there about not just loving your neighbor, turning the other cheek, but things in there that are offensive to the cultural sensibilities at the time, even around like sexuality as well. You have things like, do not look upon a woman with lust, or if you do, you're an adulterer.
Yeah.
Like, what? I was like, that's not the thing I would expect a bunch of male Roman elites to get together and submit as like,
Yeah.
wisdom.
Well, maybe
Yeah.
you can say they found this story. And so then what they did was they said, okay, peasants, this is how you should behave with humility and meekness and all of the sort of, I think of the Sermon on the Mount as Jesus defining an upside down kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you could, I think you could say something like maybe the Roman elite found this and they said, okay, this is perfect for subjugating the people. We're going to make them think that what God wants most from you is to be a good subject and to be as exploitable by the ruling elite as possible. The problem is the evidence just doesn't. The history and the evidence just don't bear that out.
The evidence does show that, and I mean, it applies to them too.
Right. Right. So that's the thing too. So
it's-
you could say we're the kings and we're the rulers,
Right.
and
I
now
mean,
you
I
guys
guess-
all have to be humble. But scriptures, and especially the things that Jesus has to
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
they have a lot to say about earthly rulership also.
Yeah, exactly. And so I find that as an interesting paradox if we accept the, I guess, the Da Vinci Code or things like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, really interesting. I mean, we're not going to go down that road, although it would be fun to at some point. But I think this was, this was fun. This is kind of like our fun episode.
Well, can we talk before we wrap up?
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
we're going a little bit long, but can we talk about one more?
Sure.
Because I saw this
Yeah.
posted yesterday, and it really just grieved my being.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to say two things. First is we spent a long time talking about the Bible.
Right.
And there's something I wanted to say during that conversation, which is I think it's a mistake to talk about the Bible, because the Bible is a collection of a whole lot of texts that were written over the course of 1,500 years-ish that are now all published by some people. Right? Not what the Jews think of as their scriptures, or I don't think they would say the Bible, but they might. That's some of the books, right? That's some of the texts that Christians call the Bible, but it's a wide range of various texts that are published under one cover because it's a collection of the texts that Christians believe are divinely inspired by God. But it is not one composition or even one kind of composition. And it's common to say, I like this a lot. Biblical theologians won't love this, but biblical theologians, I take your point. But when someone says the Bible is not a book, it's a library, that's true. In a spiritual sense, it's also a book. But that's for another discussion. If we're taking a purely academic look at it, the Bible is not a book, it's a library. It's a bunch of different texts written by a lot of people over the span of a lot of time.
Yeah.
So to talk about it as though it's all one thing is it's so imprecise that it's counterproductive. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing was, I saw this post online, and I won't read it verbatim because I don't want you to look it up and give it any traffic. But the idea was that the moral teachings of Jesus were just a big nothing burger. He was restating what people already knew, that it was much ado about nothing, and Jesus really had nothing original to say.
Right.
So why pay any attention to him? And I've done a lot of talking. I'm just going to raise that issue, right? I'm going to say that thing. What do you have to say about it?
Well, yeah, it's similar to something I mentioned earlier. I mean, I would just go straight to the Sermon on the Mount, and I would say that's total nonsense. Jesus is not the Sermon on the Mount, but the idea that he was just repeating things that people knew at the time, or the current like ethical teachings of the time, and he was just regurgitating them or whatever. That nothing he was saying was surprising. That's literally false. I think that the Sermon on the Mount obviously is a very brilliant summation of what it means to live a life that pleases God.
Yeah.
And that includes a lot of the things that were very, very countercultural. So the things like the meek are the ones who are blessed, or the peacemakers are the blessed. Blessed are you and happy are you who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Yours is the kingdom of heaven, and things like that. Blessed are those who are poor in spirit. Right? Not the religious elites, right? Not the ones who think that I'm so close to God. Blessed are those who recognize. Dietrich Bonhoeffer talks about this in Cost of Discipleship, which is a brilliant book and a brilliant exegesis on the Sermon on the Mount. He kind of retranslates that verse or exegesis to say, "Blessed are those who recognize that they need God to have a rich spirit.
Right.
Blessed are those who recognize their spiritual state." is brilliant. And things like, having mental discipline, like to control your thoughts. Like, listen, you've heard it said of old, you shall not commit adultery. Now, here's the thing. Even a lot of secular people as well will agree that that's a good thing. You should be you should be faithful to the people you make commitments to.
Yeah.
You should be faithful sexually to your spouse
Yeah.
if you say you're going to be. But Jesus goes way further than just what you do with your body.
Right.
Jesus says, if you even look upon a woman with lust, you're an adulterer already in your heart.
Yeah. I love how Dallas Willard put it. He talks about, so in that same teaching, Jesus does the same thing with murder, right? You've heard it said, don't murder, but I say if you have hated your brother, no, if you've been angry with your brother in your heart, you've committed murder. And I love the way Dallas Willard puts it, where it's like, well, you say you've never killed anybody. Well, big deal. Who did you want to kill?
Right.
And so I think you're exactly right that the statement that I made about Jesus' moral teachings were a big nothing burger, like even on its own terms, that's just false. Like it's just
definitely not. That's definitely.
So to call that shallow would be generous to shallow things. I get that's so fun. But secondly, what I would add is Jesus, his main message. Jesus was not primarily an ethics professor.
Yeah.
His main message was not about the abstract moral life. His main message was repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand. Jesus was here to seek and save the lost,
right.
not primarily to teach a coherent ethical system.
That's just the bonus. The ethical genius of it is just bonus. And I mean,
he knows what God wants from us. So the definition of a life well lived, or what is a good life, is going to fall naturally out of his teaching.
Right. Well, and a lot of so Robert Coles, I'm going to have a quote from him. He's a psychology professor at Harvard, or at least he was, and he points out that all the teachings on ethics over the last 2,000 years are simply footnotes to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount.
Right.
And I mean, that's like a really great way of putting it, but probably an understatement, because I mean, it's revolutionary.
Yeah.
I mean, the Sermon on the Mount and all of Jesus' teachings. But you're right, to make the accurate, like, theological point you're making, right? Like, all of those ethical teachings are kind of just like a bonus. That's what, like what you said, like he knows what God wants from us, and he knows like what it takes to live a life that pleases God. But Jesus' primary mission was not to sound like a smart guy or to write volumes of philosophy or teachings on ethics or things like that. It was to seek and save the lost. It was to have a real relationship with people. It was to change people's lives by having them be encountered with grace and love and compassion and mercy, specifically all aimed towards their sin. And things like having grace in the midst of them being sinners, having mercy on the sinners and things like that.
Right.
But yeah.
Right. Jesus being crucified and saying, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. And to go, that's nothing burger. Like, who cares? And this is just another example, I think, of the intellectual arrogance that so many people, including ourselves, let's be honest with ourselves and look for this in our own lives, are so guilty of. But it's like, man, even today, everyone wants Jesus to be a good and revolutionary moral teacher. And he was speaking truth to power and had said stuff to the man that the man didn't like, so he crucified him, right? Had to get rid of this little Jewish rebel or whatever. And it's like, if you have to just have no idea what you're talking about to say that. You just have to have or be a sociopath and have no moral. You have to be have no moral understanding or no moral empathy. And that was kind of the point. He said, the post said something like that, like, someone with basic empathy already understands everything that Jesus said. And I'm like, forgive them, they know not what they do. Or that who was without sin cast the first stone. Or blessed are the meek. No, people with empathy don't just know that. And never mind the philosophical question that knowing what is true is different than something being true. This epistemic question, not the metaphysical one or ontological one. But I think that's arrogant, and it's flippant, and it's unspeakably shallow to say of whatever you want to say about Jesus, the most influential thinker who has ever lived. And I'll say one other thing is, we have to say that from an extremely privileged position of living, like swimming in a Christian ethical system in the West. And it's like a fish saying there's no such thing as water because I can't feel it on my scales. It's like
right.
It's like you can only say that after having had 2,000 years of a society that is built upon and shaped by Christian ideals, as to then look around and go, "No, I don't even see anything interesting. I don't even see anything interesting anywhere."
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. So I think just to wrap this up, because I think one of the things I'm going to tell another story from Skeptics Week back in February, but during Daryl Doyama's Q&A, somebody asked. It was actually a Christian who asked this, and he didn't know what to ask, so he asked this question. Because he just got called on, but he was just like, okay, well, I guess if I were to ask you anything, I guess I would just ask, like, why Jesus? And the first thing that I thought of was, well, because he rose from the dead.
Right, of course.
And that's, because, that's why. But Daryl's answer was really profound. And I think that it was just the perfect answer, like, especially in the moment. And so Daryl's answer was, because there's no one like him. And that's true. And I started thinking about it. I started jotting down all the important people. Like, we think that politicians are important. We think religious leaders are important, professors and entertainers and royalty and philosophers and prophets and great thinkers and great authors and every holy man, every like humble person you've ever met, every single scientist, great scientist who's discovered amazing breakthroughs, and none of them hold a candle or even measure up even a little bit to the life and teachings of Jesus. Yeah. And I think that's the answer, right? It's what we celebrate during the season, right? The Easter season, like why Jesus? Because he rose from the dead, but he rose from the dead and he lived an extraordinary life. So to echo once again C.S. Lewis's point, whoever Jesus was, he's not unimportant. Yeah. He's very important, whoever he was. Yeah. And I think there's great reasons to think that he was who he said he was, which was the Son of God. Right. And
it betrays or it proves that people's primary problem, the primary barrier between people and relationship with Jesus and therefore fellowship with God is not mainly academic, because it proves that God could show up in the flesh, rise from the dead, have 4 biographies written about him, all of the stuff that's true of Jesus, and people would go, what's the big deal? He probably didn't even exist. So when we hear sometimes people that you'll ask, well, what kind of evidence would prove to you that Jesus was real? Or that God exists, or whatever. Well, God could write in the stores, "Hi, Steve, this is God, and Jesus is my son," right? And he could do it in 3 languages, whatever, pick a thing. That would be trivial for God to do. And I just go, man, you wouldn't believe. Yeah. Right? We could have unbroken video of the resurrection. No, you wouldn't believe. We could blame it on AI. We could blame it on a hallucination. We could blame it on anything else, because first and foremost, our hearts want to worship ourselves. And I know that sounds harsh, especially to people who are listening who are not disciples of Jesus. But it's true. We worship ourselves, and we treat ourselves as the standard, as the authority, as God Almighty, and we do not let things in that challenge our own sovereignty over our own universe.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thanks, Cam. This was a great way to celebrate Easter with you.
The point is, Jesus is risen. Follow him.
That's right. He's not
There's
a myth.
no one like him. He is risen. Follow Jesus.
Yeah, perfect. That's a great period to the end of the sentence. So, thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you again next time. God bless.
Thank you for listening to Word First Radio. Be sure to like, subscribe, and check us out online at wordfirst.us. Yeah!